My name is Nick Stace, and in this capacity this afternoon, I think we've just hit this afternoon, or no, perhaps we're still this morning. I'm on the board of The Conduit, and so it's an enormous pleasure for me to welcome all of you here and our wonderful panel as well. I also have this extraordinary privilege of attending a series of meetings at CoFarm, which Paul and Kim kindly host a whole range of people, extraordinary people, not like me, I have to say, but like all the other attendees that are there, people who constantly in their lives are changing the world and enjoying doing so, which was the conversation I was just having with Paul. It's important that we enjoy changing the world because then hopefully we'll do more of it. One of the things that I was going to say right at the outset is there's this lovely quote by Henry Ford, which goes along the lines of, coming together is the beginning, keeping together is progress, working together is success. And actually, I think the great thing that Paul and Kim have done is by bringing us all together and by all of us working together, we are beginning to have some success. And why that is because we are an eclectic group of people in financial services, people who are farmers, food producers, retailers, right across the spectrum, people who understand the citizen, understand the consumer, and actually you bring all of those people together and all of those voices together with a clear remit around transforming our food, health and farming and doing it in a way where the farmer is the hero. Then you reach a point where you get agreement, and from agreement I think we're about to, hopefully with an election a week away, influence the incoming government. So that was all I was going to say, but my second job, not just to welcome you, but was to tee up a video, and I'm about to do that, but I would just say one thing that's come through in the discussions really clearly at CoFarm, is that not only do we need to bring the farmer with us, and it's really important that we do that, but we must also bring the citizen with us too. And in order to do that, we must understand the citizen better, the citizen voice better. And what's become really striking in the incredible work that Sue's been doing is that the citizen voice is actually a bit more radical than our voice. And actually, when you really sit down with people and you really understand where they are, they don't have the same fears that we all have, or perhaps politicians have, about the nanny state or any other statement of that kind. Actually, they want politicians, they want all of us to work hard to come up with solutions to the challenges that we face and that people face in their everyday lives. And so that's my short way of teeing up the video, which I think will go into a little bit more detail.
Took me ages to get up there.
My name is Benhild Deshiroza. I live in Belayo, so that's in South Leeds.
I live in Bracknell in Berkshire.
Sarah dwi, dwi'n byw ym Mangor, hefo tri o blant efo ngŵr.
I live in Eden, which is quite close to the countryside.
I'm an assistant head teacher in a local grammar school.
My name's Emma and I'm a university student in Leeds and I live with 6 of my friends.
I work on a farm in Aberdeenshire.
I'm a single mother of 1 child. I work for a multi-million-pound fast food chain.
What I'm really interested in is in feeding my family. It's been really a difficult journey, me being on maternity leave.
I'm a father of 5 children, husband, and my priorities are my family, keeping them healthy and safe.
It was great to have so many conversations with people from different backgrounds.
I've gone through the whole gamut of emotions. Horrified, actually really shocked.
I now kind of look at food in a little bit more different way.
Food is connected to so many of the problems we're facing.
We should be looking at it from a broader perspective than it's just something to stop the hunger.
It's starting to fit together, but now that I know it's also impacting our environment quite a bit.
As you notice in the past 10, 15 years or even 20 years, there's a whole lot of health issues. You've got obesity, you've got diabetes, you've got skin conditions. Where have all these generated from? From the food industry. Dydyn nhw ddim, dydyn ni ddim yn nation iach ar hyn o bryd.
My son drinks sugary drinks like nobody's business, and I was thinking, where did I go wrong with that?
From personal experience with obesity, a lot of that was hardwired in me from before I was making conscious choices, and I'm paying the price, and I'm sure so many people are, and that's putting a strain on our NHS.
I think all I see now, advertisements, is new fast foods opening up all around Birmingham.
Takeaway companies are always offering discounts, especially students, and then that has an impact on our health.
Yng Nghymru, mae'r plant yn cael bwyd am ddim yn yr ysgol. Maen nhw yn bita bwydydd fatha chips a selsig a pethau faswn ni ddim fel arfer yn cynnig iddyn nhw. Taswn ni'n gwneud bocs bwyd iddyn nhw, taswn ni yn fel arfer yn gwneud dewisiadau fwy iach iddyn nhw. Dwi'n teimlo fasa'r system yn gallu newid fel bod y plant yn gallu bod yn rhan mwy o'r paratoi y bwyd.
I can't make healthy choices when it comes to food because I can't afford it. Wouldn't it be nice if everybody who is struggling to be able to actually get access to the health vouchers, where we could go shop and actually get fresh food, where we could get milk for our children?
Some of the problems are so severe that there does need to be a level of intervention from the government.
So we do need the politicians to kind of get on our side.
Da ni angen y llywodraeth I fod yn gwthio pethau ymlaen I ni cael gweld newid. Fedrwn ni ddim wneud ar ben yn hunan.
There needs to be strict rules on what companies can and can't send out regarding advertising and promotions.
Tax companies on ultra-processed foods. Companies will change.
I think we should listen more to the farmer because the farmer wants what's best for nature.
You know, we're at a critical stage now and we can turn it around if we do the right thing.
It's hard to say do one thing because there's so many problems, but once you start working through them and fixing one thing at a time, then the problem's going to shrink and it's going to become a lot clearer what you need to do next. But the first step in that is to actually take action. And
we would like action, and as soon as possible, please.
Think long term. Think about the legacy you're going to leave behind. It's not just about tomorrow's headlines, it's about the future.
Great, that's so interesting to see. My name's Henry Mance, I'm a journalist at the Financial Times. I'm chairing today. And as has been mentioned, in 9 days' time, there is an election. You can indeed bet on that, although it may not be a good idea for your career. So the optimistic take is that in the manifestos, the parties have taken food and farming more seriously than they have previously, and the less optimistic take is that there is still quite a gap with regards to detail in some of those manifestos. So the most ambitious policies have come from, most detailed policies have come from the Lib Dems and the Greens, who are looking at the unfairness of our current system. The Lib Dems have promised an extra £1 billion towards nature-friendly elms farming subsidies, and the Greens have pledged a ban on factory farming and to teach children to cook, which is quite a commitment for anyone to make. The Labour and the Tories are, I think, both promising to help farmers with the transition to nature-friendly and climate-safe practices, and they're promising to use public budgets for a better food system. So both have a target of half of public procurement of food coming from either local sources or from higher environmental standards, foods with higher environmental standards. However, both lack detailed policies. Labour also has a ban on junk food advertising to children. The Reform Party has taken a slightly different approach, or significantly different approach, proposing a ban on agricultural subsidies and to significantly reduce the migrant labour on which UK production, a lot of UK production relies. So to discuss all of that, we've got a great panel and to look at the way ahead, and really a panel of four possibly unlikely allies from across the food system. but with a clear message for politicians that food and farming may not seem like election issues, but they are going to be governing issues for whoever comes into power. So we have on the far end Paul Polman, former CEO of Unilever, with a perspective on business, but also from an international perspective. Paul spends a lot of his time across the world looking at these issues. James Mayer is the president of Danone in the UK, so brings to this issue a perspective of business and business leadership and trying to get business involved in pushing a better food system. Anna Taylor is the CEO of the Food Foundation, looking at, in particular, obesity and food inequalities. And Sue Pritchard from the Food, Farming and Countryside Commission. You bring a farmers and citizens perspective, as we've seen from those videos and those clips. We've mentioned the Hope Farm, or Nick has kindly mentioned the Hope Farm collaboration. And if you want to see the statement that was come up with by these guys and indeed many more collaborators, that's available online, but it does call for ambitious changes, mandatory and legally binding food systems targets. So something similar to what we have for climate, but for food systems. But I want to kick off our discussion. I want to start with the big question, which is why, in a time when we can have business leaders and people from civil society and indeed farmers getting on board with quite ambitious demands and calls for change, why our politicians are more timid? And Anna, if I could start with you on that one. Why do you think it is there's this gap between, indeed because that video at least suggests that it's not citizens saying don't do anything, we like it as it is, but we're not at a position where politicians are going to huge amounts of detail.
No, I mean, I think there's a few reasons for it. So I think there's a kind of question which is seen as being politically challenging around diet, what we eat. So politicians very, very reluctant to be put in a position where they could be perceived as telling people what they should be eating. That's a kind of absolute no-go area. And I think that conversation, that perception has really stymied progress in terms of thinking about the environments which are shaping what we're eating and the constraints which households face in pursuing eating the sorts of things that they'd like to eat. And I think it's interesting actually looking at there's a YouGov polling in the last few days on the different policy commitments that the different parties have made. And of the Labour Party manifesto, they pick out 10 of the big policy commitments. And the one that scored the best was the ban on energy drinks, which I thought was really interesting. 78% for under 16s, exactly. So quite interesting because that is seen as being a kind of core type nanny state type intervention, and one that has been very contested in terms of a policy conversation. And I think what's happened is that a few loud voices within Westminster have had undue sway over that conversation and have been completely detached from all these people that we've seen brilliantly portrayed in the film. We've got this massive disconnect between people's real aspirations and hopes for the food system and a very small but very noisy conversation that's happening in the media and in politics, which has been dominated by very few voices, but nevertheless loud ones. So that's one reason, which probably relates more to the sort of health challenge, if you like. I think with respect to sort of food security and production, we've gone on a journey which has basically been saying we think the market can sort this out for us. This is not an area for intervention from policymakers, and we're now seeing the consequences of that from both environmental and health perspectives, and I think what's good about the manifestos is that you do see quite a lot of consistency in terms of using subsidies to deliver environmental outcomes. That's a kind of battle that's been won, and there's cross-party consensus. And so I think that journey of recognising the role of policy in shaping the food system, we're not nearly at the level of political ambition and bravery that we need, but there have been some hard-won battles that you can see evident in the manifestos.
Yeah, and just quickly, are you saying that for example, on the energy thing, do you think politicians, it's just a misperception of where public opinion is? So they wouldn't have seen that YouGov poll, but the people you would engage with, do you think they just misread it, or do they have lots of objections to how the practicalities of, say, a ban on energy drinks around the 16th will work, or whether that's the right measure? You think it's a misreading of
I mean, that's not to downplay the implementation challenges, and we've seen some really good policies introduced where the implementation has been abysmal. The implementation has to be as important as good implementation has to be as important as the right policies. But I think the main issue, a misperception, I mean, obviously they will have polled the heck out of it. but I think they're worried about the media, any media backlash.
Great. Yeah. James, why can't politicians just leave it to the market? I mean, that would be one thing they would say. But what do you sense is the misunderstanding there?
First of all, great film, actually. And I think we need to listen to what citizens say. As a business, we would say we've got one boss, and the boss is the consumer. And we listen to the consumer, and we try and make stuff, which is what the consumer is telling us they want. So we're a business which is kind of rooted in health through food and nutrition, and that's been the case from selling yogurts in Barcelona back in the early 1900s to what we do today. But what a business needs is a clear and consistent framework within which to work. And I don't think that exists today. In fact, there is something that exists. There's a regulatory frame around products which are high in fat, sugar and salt. It's just that it hasn't been enacted, or at least not enacted in its fullness. So we've now got a location ban on unhealthy products in supermarkets. But we would really advocate, so I think we do need more regulation, and we would advocate very strongly to enact in full ASAP, the HFSS regulation, which means that we're going to stop promoting unhealthy food and we're going to stop advertising unhealthy food before a certain time of the day. We think that is a good first step, and I would love to see that. If it's not in the manifesto now, we'd love to see that adopted in the first 100 days as something meaningful. The legislation exists, it's on the statute book, we just need to get on and make it happen. Then allied to that, there's no point just doing that, we need to start to report on the healthiness of portfolios. So there's a lot of work going on in the Food Data Transparency Partnership. I'd love that to conclude quite quickly, sucks quite a lot of resource, and not make it voluntary. Why would we make that voluntary? That needs to be mandatory, we want to report against that, and from that you can start to set targets. So I think there is a range of pretty sensible stuff that doesn't need starting from the ground up that we can do, and we would really love to see that being made something quite important in the first 100 days of any new government.
And although we have a sort of consensus that has cross sectors, would a politician say, look, I also have in my ear businesses that aren't so keen on this? I mean, Danone is, for those people who don't know, you sell bottled water, you sell yogurts and dairy and plant-based, you have infant formula, other products as well, but you're not out there selling ready meals and terrible pizzas, and if there's such thing as a terrible pizza, there may not be. All pizzas obviously have their strengths, but there are businesses who are in a less strong position, shall we say, with regard to HFSS, and those. Is that the reason there isn't more progress? That
I think there's a fair argument for that. I mean, I'm not here to represent industry. I'm here to represent Danone, and a business with a portfolio which is there by design, not by accident. So it will be quite easy for me to generate some incremental turnover, bringing some products which are high in fat, sugar or salt to the portfolio and make a commercial return on that. We chose very deliberately to build a portfolio, to continue to build out that portfolio, which is very consistent in that. So yeah, I think there is a challenge to bring, but I think there is also a consensus that we need change. You know, when you realise that 25% of kids age 11 as they leave primary school are obese, that's wrong. So the food system, which was set up in the late 40s, did a remarkable job of feeding at scale, at reasonable cost. There are unintended consequences, and health is absolutely one of those. So it demands action.
Yeah. Sue, in the UK, what's your sense of why we aren't doing more?
It's the critical question, isn't it? And it was the question that we asked before we made the food conversation films. There are people in this room, Anna's one of them, Helen's in the audience, Martin Lyne's in the audience, who've been campaigning, who've been writing reports. Henry Dimbleby was commissioned by the government to write the National Food Strategy, a really strong and overarching piece of work, and still it got kicked into the long grass. So what we interrogated between us, a kind of gathering of the clan, saying, what the hell else are we supposed to do? We've done the research, we're writing the reports, we're gathering the evidence, what else are we supposed to do? What we noticed was that a serious block to change is the way we talk about food and food systems, what we started calling the toxic narratives, or the way that the food system itself is framed. And that has brought us into taking the political economy of food much more seriously, but also starting to confront one of the blockages that we heard rehearsed over and over again, both by businesses sometimes, but also by politicians. Nobody wants a nanny state. This is just a middle class concern. Consumers don't care about this stuff. And we knew that was not true. So we made the film that you've seen, and that is about confronting one of those toxic narratives that block off opportunities for change. And the other is, one of the reasons that I think citizens have really enjoyed being part of this work, so it really does feel like this is starting to support a movement for change. People come to the assemblies, they join the conversation, they want to carry on doing the work on it, is because they start to understand more about how the food system actually works at the moment. One of our commissioners said to us in our early days, if people knew what we know about the food system, what would they expect us to do? And we've been testing that out with citizens over and over again. We show them how it works. We show them where it works well, but we also show them where the unintended consequences, the unforeseen consequences of a dysfunctional food system now reside. And we call it dysfunctional, not broken. Lots of people say it's a broken food system. We say it's a dysfunctional food system because it's sure as heck not broken for everyone. And that's the other really tricky thing, which is why it's so important for us through the CoFarm project, but building consensus, building alliances, to recognise that actually for some businesses this is a big job. Some businesses make most of their profits out of food that is profoundly unhealthy. And so the transition plan for some of those businesses has got to be really, really serious. And I think James nails it when he says it is government that needs to support the businesses who want to change by levelling the playing field and setting those guardrails. So for us, the food conversation is part of a strategy that says, how do we align leadership in business, in progressive farming organisations, in the citizens' voices, to say, yeah, we know it's hard, but as one of those, one of the younger contributors in the film said, yeah, it's hard, but you've got to start. You've got to start with a step, and you've got to start with taking action. Citizens get it. And I guess that's what we're wanting to amplify and bring to the fore.
I mean, there are ways of saying that the UK is, particularly in need of change. You can look at, nature depletion. You can look at our consumption of ultra-processed foods being, relatively higher than other countries. And yet this is an issue that goes beyond the UK, and I want to bring in Paul here and say, there are politicians in some countries that have made a start and then sort of found themselves on the end of a backlash, particularly from farmers. I wonder, is the UK is it exceptional in not having leadership on these issues, or is this in fact something we're seeing around the world that progressive businesses, civil society, progressive farmers are saying we need change, and politicians are saying, if I do something, I'm gonna have a problem on my hands in one way or another.
Yeah, I don't think the UK is different from the rest of the world, to be honest. I think the issues are, obviously there are local issues, and Africa would be different than, let's say, Europe or the US, because there are different policies around these things. But the essence of our food system issues are the same. We've grown our population very fast. We had to feed our population. We've done that with a system that we call Green Revolution, which basically is to produce as cheaply as we can, as much as we can. We haven't really paid much attention to the negative externalities because they weren't really that important in those days. Now that you're at 8 billion people and going, it all of a sudden starts showing up. But it came at an enormous cost everywhere, and degrading the land, destroying the biodiversity, causing climate change, inequality, and actually everything in the Sustainable Development Goals is wrong if you look at our food system. If you would come from Mars now and you look at how we produce food in this world, you certainly wouldn't call us the most intelligent species. So now that climate change is a big issue, people are starting to get it higher on the agenda. We succeeded for the first time in Glasgow a little bit, but certainly in the UAE, to put food firmly on the agenda of climate change. People are realizing you can't solve climate change if you don't change your food system. 30% problem, but with a relatively low investment, a 30% solution. We've also become better at measuring the cost of our food system. Here in the UK alone, just the health or dietary consequences that we're talking on this panel has a cost of nearly 100 billion. And then you have governments that are only investing 1.5 or 2 billion, 2.5 billion at best, depending on how you shape it, in a system that is worth much more. In the UK, your economy is probably under 30 billion is agriculture, 20 billion export. You need to take it seriously. And the cost you're incurring of the current system are becoming just too high. Why isn't government moving? Because a lot of this is call it emerging science, but it's new. It's difficult to get your hands around because it affects all departments. I remember talking with your treasurer here and saying, you know, you have to invest a little bit more, but you're getting significant savings. We talked NHS at that time. That would be 70 billion or so. You don't have to spend on the NHS on things like diabetes too and many of the other related illnesses. Companies that pay that in sickness and absenteeism and whatever you have cost are significantly higher. But it's hard for them to really understand this. And it's toxic, you know. You saw in Italy, you saw in the Netherlands, you know, if you don't treat this properly and look at it holistically across your whole strategy as a government, you're not going to solve it. So what is the biggest barrier? I think we've gone beyond the awareness and what needs to be done. We also start to figure out that the costs are significantly less that we need to invest than the returns we get. Globally, we pay right now $12, $13 trillion. We could turn that around into $5, $6, $7 trillion positive, with investments probably of only 350 to 400 billion a year. It's one of the lowest investments and the fastest returns in all aspects. And in fact, we're actually talking about our own future here. So that is increasingly understood. We now just need to get that translated into local policies, because we can keep talking this at a global level, very abstract, and get everybody to agree. But at the end of the day, it's at the farmer's level and the landscape, and what crops, what land he has, what climate he operates in. So that's hard work and that's complex. So the main barrier, very quickly, is, to me, is trust. We have all the different fractions there, and there just isn't trust in the value chain. Undoubtedly, with the change that we need to make, there are going to be winners and losers at all levels in the value chain, but certainly at in the private sector. There are actors right now that are not helping us make this system very, very positive for society. So, and that's not just being in the junk food. There are also other elements in the value chain. So they would be opposition. Just to tell the farmer who you have rewarded for feeding the world, all of a sudden he's a villain because he causes climate change. So he needs to go to regenerative agriculture tomorrow, when already most of the farmers in the world have a subsistence, barely hanging in there, basically supported by subsidies. They're going on the streets because they're saying the economics doesn't work for me. In fact, they're the best business people in the world, I've come to discover. If the economics make sense, the farmer will move. So very few governments right now think about investing in the farmer. They're starting in the Netherlands, which is my country. The farmer is being blamed for all of this, which is quite amazing to me. Whilst with a little bit of investment, you actually make it more attractive for a farmer to make this conversion and have him get better economics. Everybody would be served by that. So putting the farmer central and making the economics work next to making the politics work is very important. Being very mindful, as Sue says as well, and James, of this faceted order of the winners and losers, so that you manage these transitions, not different from the energy transition, where you need to be mindful of closing a coal plant, that you make it work for all the people involved, otherwise the plant will not be closed. So these are some of the bigger barriers. What we're trying to do with Hope Farm, and why it is unique, is for the first time we brought together in multiple sessions, exactly because you want to build trust, on a farm, in a different environment than the office and all the pressures that come with it, a group of people, amazing group of people in the UK, that started to build trust. And it's the first time. I was having lunch with Henry yesterday, and Henry said, I don't sign anything in my life except my tax form. So I thought, that's very good news. And, but I said, I signed the Hope Farm statement, because it's the first time that you have the whole value chain, including major actors in the industry, saying that we need binding targets, that we need to attack the health parts of our food system, etc. That's revolutionary. So this framework, it's broad, but it's actually very practical, could be a good model for the next UK government to come in, whoever that may be.
Yeah, that's Henry Dimbleby. I've also seen him sign quite a few books, so you know there may be there may be exceptions to that. No, and Hope Farm is sorry, just to be clear, is your farm down in Sussex, isn't it? Which is near Net.
It's a farm that exists from the 15th century already. It's in an area called the Haven, and it's not by coincidence. It's probably a sign that it's called the Hope Farm. We didn't call it that way, because what we need now is hope. You know, we have all this news coming at us that things don't work or that things are going to be derailed. I personally don't believe in that. I think we have all the possibilities if we stay hopeful, not just optimistic, pessimistic, but hope is basically bringing people together that are aligned on doing the right thing for the planet, for future generations. And if we continue to focus on that, as you were saying, keep the end in mind of what we're trying to achieve there, we can do miracles. And I think the Hope Farm statement shows that.
Anna, I think a lot of people here would have a lot of time for Henry Dimbleby's report, the National Food Strategy, and its kind of publication was had slightly the legs cut out from under it by Boris Johnson, I think, at the time, saying we're not going to introduce any taxes. And I wonder, is there a lesson there in terms of how these issues go forward and how they should be presented to Westminster, which is, you know, taxes are very difficult for politicians to stomach. In a way, a ban, as we were just talking about with, is a kind of easier tool because it takes it off the shelf. Not actually, it's a much heavier regulation in some ways, but it's actually a more simple one for a politician to stomach. And likewise, you know, using public procurement as Labour and Tories have committed to do is a way that, you know, behind the scenes you can do something without that very politically difficult to swallow tax. I don't know what any sort of.
So I mean, there's two aspects to that. So I think there's first of all how you land bold proposals in a political context. I was on Henry's team, so I'm completely biased in all of this, but we gave it a ton of thought. And there was lots of reasons why we didn't have a political champion at the time, but that was the key problem. There was nobody on the cabinet who was going to grab this and go and defend it. So that was the need for political leadership is extremely important. We could be going into a situation if the poll, I mean, who knows what's going to happen next week, but if the polls are right, we could be in a situation where we have a government that has a very strong political mandate and not very much money, and therefore there's an opportunity there for, in that first year, for some real political bravery, and getting that leadership is going to be really, really important. The second point, though, is around taxes specifically, and the reason that we went, one of the reasons that we went down there with the tax proposal for the National Food Strategy was because you've got to get into the commercial incentives within the system. You've got to change them. At the moment, you can make the most money by selling foods which are really bad for our health, which have a limited range of ingredients and make us want to eat more of them. I mean, I just heard this morning that Subway have now introduced their American menu here, and you can buy a foot-long cookie. Who knew, right? That we needed that in the UK, but that's now available. So I think you've got to deal with the fact that you can't expect companies to go on this journey unless you make the commercial side of it align, right? And looking at where the money is, taxes and subsidies, are the kind of key instrument that policymakers have to do that. So the sugar and salt tax, as proposed, was a tax on manufacturers, intended to drive reformulation, as the soft drinks industry levy has done very successfully, but at the same time generate some revenue that can then be put into making nutritious foods more accessible to those on a low income, because we have such very marked dietary inequalities in the UK. So I think taxes have to be on the table. I don't think we can shy away from them if we're really serious about systemic change.
I'm going to come to the audience for questions in a few minutes, so please do think of what you want to ask. But James, could I ask you, what do you think over the next few months, what more could business do to push, as it were, a better food system? Is there things you're working on that might make a difference?
I mean, we've published our own health commitments around the percentage of our portfolio which will be not high in sugar, fat and salt, for example, so more than 90% of our portfolio. And it's not some future commitment for 5 years hence, it's already in place. So I'd love our kind of commitment to this kind of thing, and we're not the only company to do that of scale. There's a few more doing that. I'd love more and more people to quite quickly start to make their own commitments. But to do that, we also need to start to bring more transparency, level the playing field, as you've talked about, Anna. And to do that, this kind of data and transparency partnership, that really is quite an interesting mechanism by which everyone then will have to report. And from that, we make that mandatory, and then it starts to make everything a lot more public. And that will help us starting to set targets. And I think we do need to put some incentives in there, because reformulation is not easy. You can't just suddenly cut your sugar content by half and expect the consumer to buy it. The consumer needs to go on a journey as well. So we've been challenged in some of our yogurts to continually over the last decade and a half to cut the grams of sugar in there. And it's hard work. And we've got some of the world's best scientists sitting in big laboratories doing this stuff. But you need to be very committed to do that. So I'd love the kind of commitments we're making, more and more companies to do it, but then the regulatory environment to start to incentivize and make it a bit more transparent about where people are. Because I think we need a kind of mass change. There's no point as a few of us standing out there and going, we're going to do it. But I genuinely think there is a will to improve because of the stats we all know. I'm not going to repeat them.
And the sort of reporting requirements will be placed on you in terms of climate emissions by Paris, your Paris-aligned plan, etc.
Yeah.
You're not worried by any, I mean, it's a burden, but it's one that you are happy to...
I mean, there are a myriad of things that we're asked to report on. If I just keep this in terms of about the healthiness of our portfolio and food and nutrition, then no, I'm not worried about that in terms of what already exists in the UK. So, and I'd much rather us focus on the frameworks that have been worked on. It's built on things like the nutrient profiling model, which I think is well accepted by everybody. It's been around for almost 15 years. Let's use what there is, because otherwise we might argue forever about what a new frame is. So I'd much rather us get on and make meaningful change than try and design something new. And again, businesses need a consistent frame and long term, because that's what you set your kind of innovation agenda against. If we suddenly change and we go left and we have something else, you push back the date at which we can really start to move the system at scale. And that's what we're trying to do. We're not trying to make token gestures here. We're trying to make the UK a healthier nation via food and nutrition.
Yeah. Sue, in terms of what farmers and citizens can do, I mean, citizens maybe they're ready. They're doing their piece. They're not opposing change. They're calling for change. I mean, farmers, it's more complex, isn't it? I mean, in terms of what, whether farmers could do more to push change, because there are a lot of competing demands placed by farmers on politicians.
And there are competing versions of the future that farmers are hearing. There is the food security, produce food, intensifies at any cost narrative, and then there's the whole other movement, embodied by some folk in the room already, that talks about more resilient farming that produces food in harmony with nature, paying attention to its climate responsibilities, producing more of the healthy food we need. I mean, actually, we've made some films with farmers too. We'll be making loads more at Groundswell, the Farmers Festival, over the next couple of days. And we show through those films that there are also many farmers and farmer leaders who are also already doing the work that's needed, in spite of the absence of good market and government signals to support them. But that said, ELM in England exists, the ELM scheme exists, and that's supporting farmers in part of the journey. And there are now some businesses who are choosing to contract with farmers differently to make sure that they're farming practices are more aligned. It's partly motivated by having to account for their scope 3 emissions. There's masses of impact in the scope 3 calculations across banking, across risk, and across manufacturing. So there is a similar movement in the farming community that needs a clear sense of direction, a clear sense of the version of the future we can align behind, and then the mechanisms, the market signals and the policy signals to line up behind them. There's lots of work to do. I don't want to simplify it, and there are lots of farmers who are just kind of sitting back and waiting to see where it all lands. But there is a movement for change growing, and it's growing fast, I think, in farming.
Yeah. Paul, can I ask you what you think of the discussion on food security, which has come up here? Is it something that you see in other countries, and is it helpful to the big overarching changes in terms of emissions and health that you've spoken about?
Sure. Food security actually came to the foreground, especially with the terrible war in the Ukraine, and lots of people worried about it. It showed actually the flexibility of the food system to actually avoid that, but it's also coming to the foreground increasingly with climate change and the incredible weather patterns. Even in my last year at Unilever, we were probably paying 300 million a year easily because of changes in our value chains in terms of getting to, last year in France, they had to cut out the maize sales. They just couldn't get enough of the input because of climate change. So it's there, and it's that food security is increasingly higher on the agenda, but it's even bigger than that. We now have the COP15, we're going into the COP16 in Colombia. We have the COPs itself have food really firmly on the agenda. We just succeeded with a lot of support of everybody to get Europe to agree on the nature protection law. We have disclosure requirements that are coming in very quickly. So it is disappointing to see that the G7 in Italy, where I was, or the G20 now, are still timid around some of these things. So the first thing we need to do is have this global ambition very high. Don't forget that in the UAE, we got over 130 countries to say, I am going to report on my food system transformations as part of these nationally determined commitments on climate change. So we need to hold them to that. We'll have other meetings on that this afternoon as a coincidence. And that's the most important thing that I think we can do right now. The second one is to ensure that we, like James is doing, that the companies are held to a much higher level of commitment. There are companies that are good and they're always on the panel, but the majority have not signed things on deforestation or on fair living in the value chain, or disclosure on labeling, etc.
You're going to name some names?
And no, they are, otherwise he wouldn't be on the panel. We wouldn't invite him, because we need positive news on the panel, because what is most important is that you have companies like this, that they aren't perfect. Unilever isn't perfect, but they show that it can be done. They take a risk, they come out to the farm, they are exposed. The first meetings actually that we had 4 or 5 of them from memory in total, but the first meetings was, big business is the problem. It's very uncomfortable for big business. And with a lot of discussion, they say, yeah, we need to be, at least we need to all be part of that solution. That's where we are. So be ambitious on companies and hold them to account. And then thirdly, so the global level, ambition on countries, and the thirdly is in these partnerships. Really show governments, because it's difficult to be a politician, these issues are global. The UK government undoubtedly is worried, if we do all these things, do we become uncompetitive on food? Consumers who care about inflation, are they going to pay more and not vote for me? Will we not be able to export? So a lot of these questions are political questions, but if we get together with the broad alliance, we de-risk that political process. That's very important right now in all major areas of transformation change, not least in the food industry.
Yeah. I'm going to ask a quick one word or one sentence answer, and then we're going to come to questions. And the question is asking for one thing or giving one piece of advice to the next Prime Minister here. What would it be in terms of one policy or one piece of advice? Sue, can I start with you?
So I'm going to start in Treasury, and building on what Anna said, there's no money in the system. There's loads of money in the system. There's no money for policy change. There's £8 trillion in the food sector. And I would invite Treasury to start mapping where the money is, what it's doing, and how it's aligned for the public benefits that Treasury should be focused on. Where is all the money? What is it doing? how does it line up to support the direction of travel that the government should take?
Anna, one thing that...
But we can all add to each other's now, which is kind of good, so you get more than one. So I would say to complement that, I think what we need, and we sort of refer to this in the Hope Farm statement, is set out in primary legislation our expectations of the food system in terms of how it's going to support people in Britain to eat well. So that does mean setting targets for where we want to go, and then a programme of policy interventions that can align with that goal, but being really bold in setting out the direction of travel to align business, investor, public sector interests, as well as citizens behind that, creates the North Star from which a raft of policies can then be introduced. And that's where I think we're in desperate need of that sort of leadership at the moment.
James?
Enact the HFSS regulation ASAP. There's no need to delay. Do that. Conclude the work on transparency and reporting to level the playing field and make it much more visible where we all are, and that will then help us start to get in to set some targets and incentives to make this a movement of mass change.
Paul?
Yeah, so I'm a non-Brit, but it's outside disappointing to see how it shows up right now in the manifestos of the different parties, with the exception perhaps of one party, which will not be in the government most likely. But make it a governing issue. If you can't make it an election issue, make it a governing issue. That's the most important thing. Work with ideas like this to work in partnership. Stop these perverse subsidies that destroy nature, or that, there's money in the system. It doesn't, honestly, if you run it like a whole of systems approach, you come out ahead. There's no question about it. And then perhaps last but not least, I think the UK, which is probably the fourth biggest importer of food, would actually be in a competitive advantage if you set standards proactively. Don't just wait for the obvious to come, because it will come, because our own survival is at risk. Just be proactive, like in anything. You'll have a competitive advantage. This could be for the UK an enormous opportunity to be a competitive country in its own food, but also in relationship to many other countries. Instead of now desperately signing Australian or New Zealand deals to say we have trade agreements because nobody wants to sign up with us since Brexit, and giving away the farm. It's just stupid. So this government that comes in, whoever it may be, I think there's some speculation around it, but would really be well served to have a holistic strategy out of the starting blocks and not wait too long.
Brilliant, thank you all very much. Questions, please raise your hands. A couple over here. Great. Let's start with that gentleman there and then come to the lady in the front.
Hello, thanks. That was a great film and really interesting. So when I got into climate change about 20 years ago, solar energy was the most expensive way of producing energy. Now, over that time frame, period has crashed. There's lots of embryonic food technologies like vertical farming or cultured meat and milk and things. So if you think for 20 years, how do you think technology has the potential to totally transform our system, or will it just can perpetuate a dysfunctional system, or will it be marginal?
I mean, that is such a good question. And I think the technology question has to be understood in the context of the mission and purpose that Anna was just describing there. There are some technologies that absolutely take us in the direction of travel that we want to go in, the better use of resources, better use of robots, so that we don't have to have massive fields anymore with giant bits of kit. You can replant hedges, you can replant agroforestry, because you've now got smaller bits of kit that can do the job of those big tractors again. There are others that take us in a different direction of travel. There are some techno-optimist fantasies that are drawing a lot of money that may well go nowhere. So I think it's back to the kind of questions that we explore with citizens in the assemblies and the conversations that we run with them. We judge them against a balanced scorecard of metrics. We don't use that language with citizens, but that is what we're talking about. How many public values, public benefits does this kind of technology tick off, and where are the unintended consequences, or where are the serious risks? And citizens are so good at making sense of those trade-offs and those choices and taking a balanced approach to risk and opportunity. So I think if we bring them into that same conversation, we'll have a better pathway to investing in the kind of technology that does take us in a more sustainable direction and stop wasting money on, techno fixes that are unproved.
James, what's the technology you're excited about or not excited about?
I think we need to balance our work across horizons. So, kind of the near-term horizon, I think the agenda is much clearer. The far-term horizon, most of the stuff that will probably inspire us is not going to come from locally here. It's going to come from the Far East or in other parts of the world, because there I think we are into experimentation in a more straightforward way. I think the environment allows us to do that. So exactly what that looks like and how transformational it will be, honestly, I don't know. But we are working that kind of stuff. But most of that will sit in kind of Singaporean and Shanghai labs, I think, in the first case. And then we'll kind of think about how we bring that to other parts of the world.
Anna, do you have...
I suppose I agree fully with what Sue said. I think maybe just applying it then to the plant-based alternative protein space. I think there's a huge opportunity that's offered by the new products that are emerging from that space, because kind of recognise that we've got a real urgency and we've got to reduce our meat consumption in the UK one way or another if we're going to get on track and deliver net zero. And these products do create a sort of an immediate substitution opportunity. Having said that, we'd also like to see this opportunity of transitioning away from meat as one which leads us back to some minimally processed foods like vegetables and pulses. So again, it's a little bit more nuanced. Yeah, some of that technology could be really helpful here, but let's not throw all of our eggs in that basket, and let's think about some of those trade-offs and where we can deliver maximum outcomes for environment and health together, and animal welfare for that matter. Yeah. It's your thing, yeah.
So I don't want to repeat, I agree with all of that and what Anna just said, but it's not a technology issue, so I don't want to end on that. This is not, we need technology to solve this. On energy transition, there are some things, otherwise you can't get airplanes to fly. Here is not the case. The best technology that we have is healthy soil. And the best technology we have is healthy biodiversity. And if we combine these two with a healthy level of willpower, we can solve 95% of the issues. This is a human issue to the highest degree. This is not an issue of food security or climate change or water shortage or degraded land. This is an issue of greed, apathy, or selfishness. So we have a choice.
Great. The lady at the front. Sorry, by the way, before that question, who is in charge of timing? Can they give me I mean, I do know what the time is, but we began slightly late. So if someone does this at the back, I'll know there are no further questions. But,
Right, and sorry, because I realised there is a poll blocking me for half the panel. So thank you so much. My question is actually about whether taking a balanced approach is necessarily the right one. So we've talked a lot about health and cost and carbon. And for example, I can go currently to Asda and I can get asparagus, which is in season in the UK, but it's cheaper for me to go to Asda and buy it, and it's come from Peru. So we know there's kind of a trade-off there. We've talked a lot about health, and we know that 70% of promotional products at supermarket checkouts are not actually good for us. It feels like there's a risk of us trying to tackle cost, carbon, and health in a way that doesn't necessarily drive impact at the scale that's required. And I'm just wondering if you feel that we might be better suited to really going hard on one of these areas.
Who wants to come in on that? We maybe won't take responses from everyone, so we can squeeze in one more question, but who wants to come in? Okay.
I'm very, very happy to make that, to respond to that, because I'm a very old woman, and I've been working in campaigning for hundreds of years, in all seriousness, 40 years. So I have worked a long time with different campaigning organisations, with different priorities, and they are all really, really important. But what we determined, I think, was certainly in the formation of FFCC, was that we needed an alliance and a consensus because, well, first of all, because action in one space can drive very bad consequences in another space if we're not really careful. But as one of my mentors once said to me decades ago, we are killing ourselves because we cannot think in wholes, in systems, in whole systems. And until we both think in wholes and connect up, join up policy in a way that is really effective, when we concentrate on one, we are at best likely to see unintended consequences in other areas. So I think it is a really, really good question, but my experience tells me that actually that is exactly the work that we need to do. We need to align in a consensus for, you know, whole systems change.
Does anyone else desperately want to come in? Otherwise, I'm going to squeeze in what. No. Great. One last question. Sorry to those who had their hand up elsewhere. But, quick question.
Yeah. So a lot of what we've talked about today implies that food will be more expensive. If you agree, I'd be interested whether you agree with that or not, and if you do agree with it, whether you think it's how we ensure that that expense is not kind of just for, greatest respect, people in this room who can afford the expensive food and is distributed fairly.
Great. Will food be Anna Kizel?
Okay. Felt like I was a soft target there.
I just saw a clip last night, by the way, of Nick Robinson interviewing the co-leader of the Greens, and he brought out a burger to say, "Are you going to ban this?" So I sort of feel like the tangibility of food does lend to ridiculous. I think it depends which burger.
Okay.
Is food going to be more expensive?
Well, I think it depends. I think in the short term it could be, but I think the problem of affordability needs to be not just looked at through the lens of the price of food. First of all, we've got a big balance of prices wrong with food. The bad stuff's cheap and the good stuff's more expensive. And we also have a massive income problem. We've got too many people in the country who are struggling. They literally can't afford to put food on the table. Those are big numbers, and they've doubled during the cost of living crisis. That's a problem of wages and the benefit system, not at the moment ensuring that people can actually cover the basic cost of living. So that's one set of policy problems, which is that interfaces with the food system, because obviously the food system employs a lot of people, but also is separate to some extent. So I think we need to look at the affordability problem through both of those lenses in order to solve it.
James, I'm going to give you the last word on this, if that's all right. But would your consumers tolerate higher prices?
I mean, we've been through an inflation tsunami in the last 2.5 years. That is absolutely slowing down, that's clear. Good food, healthy food doesn't have to be extraordinarily expensive. And we generally are passionate about that. If I look at our plant-based portfolio, then that's not expensive, it is reasonably accessible. So I really don't think at scale, and if you set yourself up in the right way, if you're trying to do stuff in very, very small, it can be expensive. But you can create good, healthy food at a fair price. And that is absolutely our intention on the day-to-day. We don't operate at this end of the market. We want to operate in the mass part of the market.
Thank you so much to my panel who have brought expertise and interesting thoughts. Thank you all for your questions. And do read the Hope Farm statement, which is available on various websites, and stay tuned to after the election. Thanks very much to Nick and the organisers.